Before they became detectives, cowboys, comedians, and villains, they were pilots, sailors, soldiers, prisoners, and spies. Some returned with medals, some with wounds. Most returned in silence. Across 2 world wars, these 100 actors lived stories Hollywood could never have written. This is the complete file on Hollywood's secret soldiers. He was already an Oscar winner when he joined the Army Air Forces. Rather than use his fame for publicity, Stewart fought for an overseas combat assignment. He flew 20 missions in B-24 bombers, commanded the 703rd Bomb Squadron, and often led formations over enemy territory. He finished the war as a colonel and became a brigadier general in 1959. His contracts forbade studios from using his military service for publicity. After his wife, Carol Lombard, died returning from a war bond rally, Clark Gable enlisted at the age of 41. Sent to England to film aerial gunners in action, he volunteered for 5 combat missions aboard B-17 bombers. During one raid, a 20mm shell tore the heel from his boot and passed within inches of his head. He returned home as a decorated major. He was one of the few major Hollywood stars to leave America and return to Britain to fight. Rejoining the British Army, David Niven later served with the secret GHQ Liaison Regiment, better known as Phantom, relaying frontline intelligence back to high command. In 1944, he went into Normandy and served across Western Europe before returning to film after the war. Already a Hollywood star, Henry Fonda enlisted in the Navy at 37, saying he did not want to fight a fake war inside a studio. He served aboard the destroyer USS Satterley, then became an air combat intelligence officer in the Pacific. His work during the Marianas Campaign earned him the Bronze Star. He finished the war as a lieutenant. He parachuted into Normandy before dawn on D-Day as a lieutenant with the 7th Parachute Battalion. Todd and his men fought their way to reinforce Pegasus Bridge, helping hold one of the invasion's most vital crossings. 18 years later, in The Longest Day, he returned to the same story on film, playing Major John Howard, while another actor portrayed Todd himself. Paul Newman entered Navy pilot training, but was dropped before qualifying. Retrained as a radioman gunner, he flew in Avenger torpedo bombers across the Pacific. An ear problem grounded his pilot before Okinawa, keeping Newman off USS Bunker Hill. Days later, kamikazes struck the carrier and killed men from his unit. Kirk Douglas served aboard the anti-submarine patrol craft USS PC-1139 in the South Pacific. In 1944, a depth charge exploded beneath the vessel and left him internally injured. Medically discharged at 27, he returned to New York with little money or work. Within 5 years, he was an Oscar-nominated Hollywood star. Before Hollywood gave him chariots and empires, Charlton Heston served aboard B-25 Mitchells in the Aleutian Islands. He was a radio operator and aerial gunner with the 77th Bombardment Squadron, flying in fog, ice, and violent North Pacific winds. He rose to staff sergeant and was just 21 when the war ended. Charles Bronson left the Pennsylvania coal mines for the Army Air Forces. In 1945, he served as a B-29 aerial gunner with the 61st Bombardment Squadron on Guam, flying 25 missions against Japan. Wounded in combat, he received the Purple Heart before returning home to Hollywood. Ernest Borgnine joined the Navy in 1935, left in 1941, then re-enlisted after Pearl Harbor. He served aboard USS Lamberton and the patrol yacht USS Sylph, hunting U-boats in the Atlantic. Discharged in 1945 as a gunner's mate first class, he had spent nearly 10 years in uniform. Rod Steiger ran away from home at 16 and enlisted in the Navy in 1942. As a torpedo man aboard USS Tausig, he survived Typhoon Cobra by securing himself to the deck while 80-foot waves struck the fleet. 3 destroyers sank and nearly 800 sailors were lost. Tyrone Power left Hollywood to become a marine transport pilot. With VMR 353, he flew cargo and evacuation missions supporting Iwo Jima and Okinawa, carrying supplies in and wounded Marines out. He returned from the Pacific as a first lieutenant and later rose to major in the reserve. Humphrey Bogart joined the United States Navy in 1918 and served aboard the troopship USS Leviathan. During the final months of the First World War and after the armistice, the ship crossed the Atlantic carrying soldiers between America and Europe. He left the Navy in 1919 as a petty officer second class. Laurence Olivier joined the Fleet Air Arm and trained as a naval pilot in Britain, gaining a reputation for flying mishaps. In 1943, the Ministry of Information released him for film work. He directed and starred in Henry V, creating one of Britain's defining wartime morale films. Ralph Richardson joined the Fleet Air Arm as a pilot and rose to lieutenant commander. Aircraft mishaps earned him the nickname Pranger, though much of his wartime work was administrative. In 1944, the Royal Navy released him after the Old Vic requested his return. Richard Burton entered the Royal Air Force hoping to become a pilot, but poor eyesight ended that ambition. He trained briefly as a navigator in Canada before serving at Royal Air Force Hospital Wroughton. By the time he left in 1947, the young Welsh miner's son had already discovered Shakespeare at Oxford. At Holtzwihr in January 1945, Audie Murphy ordered his men back, then climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and fought alone with its machine gun while directing artillery by radio. Wounded in the leg, he stopped the German counterattack and earned the Medal of Honor. Charles Durning landed in Normandy with an army artillery unit and was badly wounded by a German mine. After 6 months of recovery, he returned with the 398th Infantry Regiment and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He earned the Silver Star and 3 Purple Hearts. Neville Brand served with Company B, 331st Infantry Regiment, 83rd Infantry Division. He earned the Silver Star for attacking a German machine gun position and was later shot through the upper right arm near the Weser River in April 1945. The wound nearly killed him. At Tarawa in November 1943, Navy Lieutenant Eddie Albert took a landing craft through heavy machine gun fire to rescue 47 stranded Marines, then directed 4 more boats that saved 30 others. For this action, he received the Bronze Star with Combat V. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. conceived the Navy's beach jumpers, using small boats, smoke, radio deception, and recorded invasion sounds to mislead enemy forces. Their false landings diverted attention from the real assaults in Sicily and southern France, earning him honors from several Allied nations. Wayne Morris flew F-6F Hellcats from USS Essex with VF-15. In 57 combat sorties, he shot down 7 Japanese aircraft, sank 2 vessels, and helped sink a submarine. One of Hollywood's genuine fighter aces, he returned with 4 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 2 Air Medals. Serving as John Hamilton, Sterling Hayden joined the Marine Corps Reserve and was attached to the OSS. He made hazardous Adriatic voyages, supplying Yugoslav partisans, and parachuted behind enemy lines. His courage in enemy-controlled waters earned him the Silver Star. Sabu became a film star as a boy, then an American citizen and Army Air Forces gunner. With the 371st Bomb Squadron, he flew B-24 Liberators across the Pacific as a tail and ball turret gunner. After dozens of combat missions, he received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Robert Fleming left a successful stage career to join the Royal Army Service Corps. He served with distinction in Eritrea and Italy, earned the Military Cross, was mentioned in dispatches, and appointed OBE. By 33, he had risen to colonel before returning to the theatre. Before America entered the war, Robert Montgomery drove ambulances in France. He later served in the US Navy with PT boats and, on D-Day, aboard USS Barton as an intelligence officer during the Normandy landings. He left the war a lieutenant commander with the Bronze Star. Glenn Ford served in the Marine Corps during the Second World War, then returned to uniform in 1958 as a Naval Reserve officer. In 1967, he accompanied a combat camera crew across South Vietnam. The assignment earned him the Navy Commendation Medal, and he later retired as a captain. George O'Brien had already served in the First World War when he returned to the Navy in his 40s. During the second, he became a beachmaster in the Pacific, coordinating landing craft, troops and supplies during amphibious operations. He later retired from the Naval Reserve as a captain. On the 21st of September 1944, while dropping supplies to the trapped airborne troops at Arnhem, his Dakota was attacked on the return flight and caught fire. He refused to jump because 3 of his dispatchers were wounded and could not. He brought the aircraft down, survived terrible burns, and became one of Archibald Mackindow's guinea pig club. The moustache came later to hide the scars. Western Star Tim Holt entered the Army Air Forces and became a B-29 bombardier in the Pacific. During one of the final missions over Tokyo, he was wounded by enemy fire. He returned home with the Distinguished Flying Cross and Purple Heart, then resumed his film career. Orphaned at 11, Dan Rowan later became a P-40 pilot with the 8th Fighter Squadron in New Guinea. He shot down 2 Japanese aircraft before being downed and seriously wounded. He returned with 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, an Air Medal and a Purple Heart. Arthur Franz served as a B-24 Liberator navigator in the Army Air Forces. Shot down over Romania, he was captured and held as a prisoner of war before escaping. After the war, he became a familiar face in military films, including Sands of Iwo Jima and the Caine Mutiny. Tom Poston served as an Army Air Forces transport pilot in North Africa and Europe. During the Normandy invasion, his aircraft carried paratroopers into battle. He returned home a captain, then spent decades playing charmingly confused men, the opposite of the officer he had been. After his younger brother was killed near Arras, Basil Rathbone volunteered for daylight reconnaissance on the Western Front. Camouflaged with foliage and burnt cork, he approached German positions to photograph them. His daring patrols earned him the Military Cross. William Wyndham served as a paratrooper with Company B, 1st Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. After the war, he was stationed with occupation forces in Frankfurt, where he became involved in theatre, the beginning of a screen career that lasted nearly 60 years. At Ypres, in October 1914, a shell burst, threw Ronald Coleman to the ground, and fractured his right ankle. The injury left him with pain and a lifelong limp, and he was medically discharged in 1915. On screen, he learned to conceal it. Only the famous voice revealed nothing. Near Kemmel in January 1915, machine gun fire struck Nigel Bruce in both legs and fractured his right thigh. He spent much of the year in hospital and was discharged with permanent damage. He later returned as a training officer before becoming cinema's most famous Dr. Watson. At Arras in 1917, a sniper's bullet destroyed Herbert Marshall's left knee. His leg was amputated after repeated operations, followed by 13 months in hospital. He mastered his prosthetic so completely that Hollywood audiences never saw the pain beneath his elegance. Art Carney served with the 28th Infantry Division in Normandy, where shrapnel wounds left his right leg permanently shorter than the left. He returned home with a Purple Heart and a lifelong limp, one he later folded into the physical comedy of Ed Norton. At Anzio, James Arness was ordered off his landing craft first because his height made him ideal for testing the water's depth. Later in the battle, he was severely wounded in the right leg. The injury caused lifelong pain that followed him through 20 years as Matt Dillon. Charles Lawton served first with the Huntingdonshire Cyclist Battalion, then the 7th Northamptonshire Regiment. He was gassed on the Western Front in 1918 and returned to his family's hotel before choosing the stage. Within 15 years, he had won an Oscar as Henry VIII. Walter Brennan served in France with the 101st Field Artillery. Wartime gas exposure was later blamed for the cracked, reedy voice that became his trademark, though the link was never medically proven. He later became the first actor to win 3 Academy Awards. Claude Rains entered the London Scottish with a Cockney accent and a speech impediment. Gassed at Vimy in 1916, he lost most of the sight in his right eye and suffered vocal damage. After the war, years of elocution training created the cultivated voice Hollywood remembered. At the Somme, Arnold Ridley suffered a bayonet wound, severe head trauma, shrapnel injuries, and permanent damage to his left hand. Medically discharged in 1917, he volunteered again in 1939. Decades later, he became television's gentle Private Godfrey in Dad's Army. Jack Palance trained as a B-24 Liberator pilot in the Army Air Forces. A wartime crash left him with severe burns and head injuries, followed by reconstructive surgery. The accident may have shaped the gaunt features Hollywood later turned into one of cinema's most intimidating faces. In June 1944, a defective fuse detonated TNT in Sergeant Harold Russell's hands, costing him both of them. An Army rehabilitation film brought him to William Wyler's attention. His performance in The Best Years of Our Lives earned 1 competitive and 1 honorary Oscar. Telly Savalas served as a corporal in an Army medical training unit at Camp Pickett. A serious car accident left him hospitalized for more than a year and ended his service in 1943. He did not begin acting until his mid-30s, but soon became one of television's most commanding presences. Bill Owens served with the Royal Army Ordnance Corps and was injured in an explosion during battle training. Nearly 3 decades later, he became Compo in Last of the Summer Wine, playing a man who refused to grow old, and continued in the role for 26 years. Spike Milligan served with the Royal Artillery in North Africa and Italy. At Monte Cassino in 1944, he was wounded and suffered shell shock. He later transformed the experience into 7 volumes of war memoirs, comic, painful, and unlike anything else written about the conflict. Before Dracula, Bela Lugosi served as an Austro-Hungarian infantry officer in the Carpathians. Wounded on the Russian front, he received the Wound Medal. Forced from Hungary after the 1919 revolution, he reached America and learned his first English stage role phonetically. Trevor Howard was commissioned into the South Staffordshire Regiment in 1942, but relinquished his commission through ill health the following year. 2 years later, Brief Encounter made his restraint and quiet authority famous, qualities cinema would use for 4 decades. William Hartnell served for 18 months in the British Army's tank arm before a nervous breakdown led to his medical discharge. He returned to play soldiers, policemen, and hard men. Then, at 55, became the first Doctor Who, replacing command with Curiosity. Lee Marvin served as a scout sniper with the 4th Marine Division. At Saipan in June 1944, machine gun fire severed his sciatic nerve and a sniper wounded his foot. After more than a year in naval hospitals, he was medically discharged and later buried at Arlington. Don Adams served with the Marines on Guadalcanal, where blackwater fever nearly killed him. Evacuated to New Zealand, he spent more than a year in hospital before returning as a drill instructor. 2 decades later, he became television's most famous bumbling secret agent. Jason Robards was aboard USS Northampton when 2 Japanese torpedoes sank her at Tassafaronga in November 1942. He survived the night in the water until rescue at dawn. 2 years later, a kamikaze struck USS Nashville, killing 133 men. He survived both disasters. Denholm Elliott was serving as a wireless operator and air gunner when his Halifax was hit by flak and ditched in the North Sea in September 1942. Captured and sent to Stalag Luft 8B, he formed a theatre company that toured other prisoner-of-war camps. Captivity became his real dramatic education. Donald Pleasance served as a Lancaster wireless operator with No. 166 Squadron. On August 31, 1944, his aircraft was shot down over France and he was taken to Stalag Luft 1. Years later, his real experience as a prisoner of war gave The Great Escape an authority few actors could match. Clive Dunn served as a trooper with the 4th Queen's Own Hussars and was captured during the fall of Greece in 1941. He spent 4 years as a prisoner in Austria, later serving as a medical orderly and prisoner's representative. At 48, he became Britain's most famous comic old soldier in Dad's Army. Percy Herbert served with the Royal Army Ordnance Corps in Singapore. After surviving the Alexandra Hospital massacre, he spent years as a Japanese prisoner and worked on the Burma Railway. When David Lean made the bridge on the River Kwai, Herbert acted in the film and advised the production from experience. Desmond Llewellyn served as a second lieutenant with the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. Captured during the retreat to Dunkirk in 1940, he attempted to escape from Laufen through a tunnel and was transferred to Colditz. After nearly 5 years behind wire, he spent 36 years keeping James Bond alive. Sam Kidd was captured during the fighting in France in 1940 and spent the rest of the war in Stalag 20A. He became a leading force in the camp theatre and refused repatriation after 3 years so the performances could continue. Back home, he appeared in more than 290 films. Peter Butterworth's Fairy Albacore was shot down over the Wadden Sea in June 1940. At Stalag Luft 3, he and Talbot Rothwell used noisy comic performances to mask tunneling, while Butterworth vaulted over the Wooden Horse escape tunnel. After the war, its filmmakers rejected him as not athletic enough. James Whale came from a working-class Dudley family and worked as a cobbler and sign painter before becoming an army officer. Captured in Flanders in 1917, he discovered stagecraft while producing plays at Holzminden. He entered the camp a soldier and left ready to become a director. John Loder was a cavalry officer on the Western Front when the Germans captured him at Roissel on March 21, 1918. He passed through Le Cateau and prisoner of war camps in Germany. When the war ended, he did not go home. He stayed, opened a pickle factory in Potsdam, and became an actor. At 17, Christopher Lee went to Finland as a volunteer, though he never reached the fighting. An optic nerve defect later ended his Royal Air Force pilot training, so he became an intelligence officer. He served through North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, liaising with special forces units, but never serving as an SAS or SOE operative. Alec Guinness commanded a landing craft in the invasion of Sicily, bringing 200 soldiers ashore at Cape Passero in July 1943. He later crossed the Adriatic with weapons and supplies for Yugoslav partisans, returning with their wounded. He rarely spoke about the war. He did not need to. Leslie Howard was flying home from a propaganda tour of Spain and Portugal when 8 German fighters found BOAC Flight 777 over the Bay of Biscay. The unarmed airliner was shot down and everyone aboard was killed. Why the Germans chose that aircraft has never been conclusively explained. Marius Goring's German was so convincing that the BBC sent his voice into Germany under the name Charles Richardson. He later joined the intelligence staff at SHAF, rising to colonel. Family records say the broadcasts put his name on a Nazi arrest list. John Pertwee served aboard HMS Hood and left her shortly before her final voyage. When the battlecruiser was destroyed in May 1941, only 3 men survived. Pertwee later became a Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve officer, serving in naval intelligence and naval broadcasting before returning to acting. Michael Benteen served as a Royal Air Force intelligence officer with Bomber Command, debriefing aircrews after operations and recording what they had encountered. In 1945, he recalled entering Bergen-Belsen shortly after its liberation. He later treated humour not as an escape from horror, but as a way of surviving it. Dirk Bogarde followed the invasion into Normandy, not as an infantryman, but as a photographic intelligence officer, reading the enemy from pictures taken thousands of feet above Europe. In April 1945, shortly after Bergen-Belsen was liberated, he walked through its gates. He wrote about many things afterward. That memory never truly left him. Anthony Quayle was sent behind enemy lines into German-occupied Albania as an officer of the Special Operations Executive. For months he lived in the mountains, moving among rival resistance groups and trying to turn them against a common enemy. When he finally escaped in April 1944, he reached Italy with malaria and jaundice, relieved simply to be alive. John Le Mesurier served as an officer in the Royal Tank Regiment and was posted to India in 1943. He returned not with stories of battlefield heroism, but with the quiet understatement that became his signature. Years later, as Sergeant Wilson, he played military authority as only he could, courteous, unruffled, and faintly surprised by the whole affair. Patrick Troughton served in the Royal Navy's coastal forces, where fast wooden gunboats and torpedo boats fought at close range in dangerous home waters. As First Lieutenant of MTB 500, he took part in operations that earned him a mention in dispatches. Years later, he became the Second Doctor, yet remained almost as elusive off-screen as he was unpredictable on it. Michael Hordern served aboard HMS Illustrious as a fighter direction officer. Below the flight deck, radar gave him shapes and distances. His voice turned them into instructions, guiding pilots towards enemy aircraft still hidden beyond the horizon. The same measured authority would later make him one of Britain's most unmistakable character actors. Harry Andrews spent the Second World War with the Royal Artillery and reportedly rose to acting major. When he returned to acting, his imposing presence and unmistakable authority made him a natural choice for soldiers, sergeant majors, and commanding officers. The uniform became one of his screen signatures, but the authority behind it had been earned long before the cameras arrived. The Army first made Peter Ustinov a private in the Royal Sussex Regiment. After several uncomfortable months, his talent was finally recognised, and he was transferred to the Army Kinematograph Service. He reportedly served for a time as David Niven's Batman, then helped Eric Ambler write The Way Ahead, one of the finest British Army films of the war. Bernard Lee served through the Second World War with the Royal Army Service Corps and rose to captain. When he later became M, he needed no theatrical display of command. A desk, a clipped instruction, and a steady stare were enough. Across 11 Bond films, he made authority look completely natural. John Mills was commissioned into the Royal Engineers, but a stomach ulcer ended his military service in 1942. He returned to the screen and spent much of the war portraying the sailors and soldiers who remained in action. For the next 6 decades, he became one of British cinema's most convincing images of ordinary courage under pressure. Ian Carmichael served as an officer with the 22nd Dragoons during the Northwest Europe campaign and rose to the rank of major. He was mentioned in dispatches, although much of his later wartime work involved staff duties and organising entertainment for the troops. After the war, he became Britain's definitive screen silly ass, a comic identity far removed from the uniform he had worn. Nigel Patrick joined the King's Royal Rifle Corps in 1939 and served as an officer in the Middle East. Later accounts credit him with reaching the rank of lieutenant colonel. When he returned to the theatre and cinema, the calm authority he had carried in uniform became one of his most distinctive qualities on screen. John Laurie served as a private with the Honourable Artillery Company during the First World War. More than 2 decades later, he served again in Britain's real Home Guard. Then, at 71, he became Private Fraser in Dad's army, the doom-laden Scot, forever warning that they were all doomed. Unlike the character, Laurie already knew what wartime service actually meant. Julia Child was too tall for the women's military services, so she joined the OSS. In Ceylon and China, she became Chief of Registry, handling classified communications. She also helped develop shark repellent for stranded airmen and sailors, an unlikely first step towards becoming America's most famous cook. Audrey Hepburn was 11 when the Germans occupied the Netherlands. As a teenager near Arnhem, she carried messages for the resistance and danced at secret performances where audiences dared not applaud. During the Hunger Winter, she survived severe malnutrition on makeshift foods that included bread made from tulip bulb flour. Marlene Dietrich was born in Berlin, but rejected Nazi attempts to bring her back and became an American citizen instead. She recorded anti-Nazi broadcasts for the OSS and performed for Allied troops across North Africa, Italy, France and Germany, often close to the front line and within range of enemy fire. Leo Genn did not merely serve in the war, he later helped prosecute its crimes. A lieutenant colonel in the Royal Artillery and a trained barrister, he joined the British war crimes team investigating Bergen-Belsen and served as an assistant prosecutor at the 1945 trial. 6 years later, he was nominated for an Academy Award. Jackie Coogan had once been the most famous child star in America. During the war, he became a glider pilot with the 1st Air Commando Group. On the night of March 5, 1944, he flew British Chindit troops deep behind Japanese lines in Burma, landing in a jungle clearing during Operation Thursday. 30 years later, television audiences knew him as Uncle Fester. Werner Klemperer was a German Jewish refugee whose family fled Nazi Germany in 1935. After becoming an American citizen, he served in the United States Army and entertained troops across the Pacific. Years later, he accepted the role of Colonel Klink on one condition: Klink must always remain the fool and must never be allowed to win. John Banner was an Austrian Jewish actor touring Switzerland when Nazi Germany annexed his homeland. Unable to return, he escaped to America and later served as a supply sergeant in the United States Army Air Corps. His parents and sister were murdered in the Holocaust. Years later, he became Sergeant Schultz, the harmless German guard who famously saw nothing and knew nothing. Harry Belafonte joined the United States Navy at 17, serving a country whose armed forces were still segregated. He was assigned to load ammunition at Port Chicago shortly after the explosion that killed 320 people. Later, in a naval prison in Virginia, he watched German prisoners receive better treatment than Black American sailors, an experience that deepened his commitment to civil rights. Ossie Davis served in a segregated Army medical unit at the 25th Station Hospital in Liberia. Trained as a surgical assistant, he cared for American troops while confronting the same racial system they had carried overseas. 20 years later, he delivered the eulogy at Malcolm X's funeral. B. Arthur enlisted in the Marine Corps Women's Reserve in 1943, only days after it opened to women. She trained in motor transport, drove military trucks, and rose to staff sergeant. One interviewer described her as argumentative and over-aggressive, an assessment that now reads almost like a preview of the characters she would later play. Betty White joined the American Women's Voluntary Services after the United States entered the war. By day, she drove a PX truck carrying supplies to military gun positions around Los Angeles. At night, she danced, played cards, and talked with servicemen before they were sent overseas. 80 years later, the United States Army honored her wartime service. Ronald Reagan's poor eyesight kept him from overseas combat, so he served as a captain with the Army Air Force's 1st Motion Picture Unit. His unit produced hundreds of training and information films for American air crews. Later accounts linked him to footage from the liberated concentration camps, but his exact personal role in handling that material remains unverified. Gene Kelly served with the United States Naval Reserve at the Naval Photographic Science Laboratory in Washington. There, he helped make training films and directed Combat Fatigue Irritability, a film about the psychological effects of war. After returning to Hollywood, he transformed the way dance was filmed on screen. Richard Attenborough served with the Royal Air Force Film Production Unit as an air gunner cameraman, flying operational sorties to record the air war over Europe. 18 years later, he played the leader of the Escape Committee in The Great Escape, bringing quiet authority to one of his most memorable wartime roles. Burgess Meredith served as a captain in the United States Army Air Forces. In Britain, he helped write, direct, and present A Welcome to Britain, a film teaching newly arrived American troops how to understand a country already exhausted by 4 years of war. His confirmed wartime contribution was filmmaking, not frontline combat photography. John Bowles graduated from the University of Texas in 1917 and spent 2 years serving with the United States Army's intelligence service during the First World War. The surviving public record gives few details of his duties. After the war, he studied music, became a Broadway singer, and later starred in Frankenstein. James Doohan landed on Juno Beach with the Royal Canadian Artillery on D-Day. That night, a nervous Canadian sentry mistook him for the enemy and hit him with 6 rounds. 4 struck his leg, 1 destroyed a finger, and another was stopped by a metal cigarette case. Years later, he became television's most famous engineer. but he had survived the real invasion first. Long before Mel Brooks made audiences laugh at Hitler, he had faced Hitler's army as a combat engineer. During the Battle of the Bulge, he worked near the front-clearing German landmines so Allied troops could advance. He survived the war and spent the rest of his career reducing Nazis to objects of ridicule,